couple months ago, I watched a Netflix documentary called Seaspiracy. You might have heard of it. And the reason why it interested me so much was because it tackled a very interesting problem. And that problem was illegal fishing. More specifically, IUU fishing, which stands for illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. It's basically when individuals don't have a license or approval from the government in order to fish in a specific area. This is usually done with boats called trawlers that sweep the ocean bed, and this makes them catch everything in their path. And this is effectively a person stealing a country's natural resources, robbing them of potential jobs and revenue. And this isn't just a small issue. Nearly $36.4 billion worth of fish is stolen from the ocean seas every year. And IUU fishing has become so prevalent that an estimated 1 in 5 fish sold for commercial use has been caught through IUU fishing. This means whenever you go to the seafood market, there's a good chance that the fish you bought comes from these illegal areas. However, you might say that I only buy fish that is guaranteed safe caught. However, many of the big certifiers, such as the Marine Stewardship Council, who you might have seen in the grocery store with the blue tick, have come under constant criticism for their lack of action and not being strict enough with their restrictions. And it's become such of a big of a problem that we as consumers really can't do anything about it. And this leads to disastrous consequences for the environment and human life as a whole. This market has attracted terrorist organizations and cartels as another source of income to fund their operations. With this being a $36.4 billion industry, you bet that people with bad intentions are making a lot of money through this. And that goes right into helping them cause even more problems in our world. These operations almost always use human trafficking in order to get cheaper labor. And these people are forced to work for years on end without break, and are usually captured from places such as Vietnam, who have massive human trafficking institutions already, with being in areas with a lot of fish, such as the Philippines and the South China Sea. But it also has a massive impact on the environment. One term that comes up a lot is the practice of bycatch. Bycatch is basically when a fisher catches fish that is not in its target species. So the process of bycatch has become so common that 40% of all marine life caught has been caught as bycatch and thrown right back into the sea. Additionally, IUU fishing is one of the biggest threats to our oceans today. George Bimbaugh, an environmental advocate, states that overfishing has more of an impact than oil spills, climate change, and dumb plastics on the ocean. And discarded fishing nets contribute negatively to the ocean's environment. In fact, nearly half of the Great Pacific's garbage patch is made of these fishing lines and nets. These materials are much deadlier than plastics because these nets were designed to kill. Thus, even when discarded, these nets just keep on killing sea life. And the death of sea life also has disastrous consequences. Microorganisms in the ocean absorb 4 times more oxygen, CO2, than the Amazon rainforest. And nearly half of the oxygen we breathe comes from whales, whose feces react with phytoplankton in the sea. And this process not only adds oxygen, but also removes it. So what's the current situation? There has been some policy that has been enacted. For example, the EU has created forms to make sure that people declare where the fish is coming from. However, the enforcement and current estimates are putting this initiative as a failure. However, there has been some better policies that have been instituted. For example, the EU is using its massive economic power to try to warn and potentially sanction non-EU countries suspected of ignoring IUU fishing. While all these things help, it also hurts small legal fishers. Basically, in order for us as a society to make an impact on illegal fishing, it will require, on the policy side, it will require a broad and long-term solution with international cooperation. Right now, all these solutions have only been done within the EU. So governments are not able to coordinate and consumers are not able to make an impact. How do we solve this problem? And that's how the documentary ended. No solution, no nothing. And I was just left there wondering if there was anything I could do to solve the problem. And this was around the time that I started getting into machine learning. So I researched the problem more and I found that the reason why it exists is because it's so hard to detect. It's hard to determine whether a boat is fishing or not based off of one data point. This is because there's many fishes and boats that are coming in and out of the country's waters. Additionally, they can't just tell everyone to not come in there because of the idea of innocent passage, where a boat can come and go through a country's waters without their permission. And a lot of these boats in that zone, you don't really know what they're doing. And especially for smaller countries such as the Philippines, it's hard for them to protect all of their shore. And coming from the global supply chain perspective, it's super complex and relatively weakly regulated. So illegal fish can easily penetrate the supply chains quite easily. And I thought this was an interesting problem to solve with machine learning, since the core root of the problem is not having enough or not being able to process the data that's coming in from these ships. And that's what I decided to do, basically using machine learning to detect illegal fishing. And we're getting this data from the Global Fishing Watch, which actually harvests MMSI data, which we'll get into later. And we'll go also into what machine learning is. But first, let's go over what MMSI data is. It stands for Marine Mobile Service Identity. It's kind of like an identity for ships. It relays information such as the distance from port, speed, course, lat long coordinates to the port and other boats. We use this data to determine whether the boat was fishing or not. So let's go over now what machine learning is. In the most simplest forms, machine learning is like a child. It keeps on guessing. And for example, in this case, I'll just keep on guessing what the answer will be. Would it be a 0 where it's not fishing, or 1 where it is fishing? And then it will be able to understand, find different patterns in the data after it keeps on failing again and again. As seen in the figure, what we do in order to make this model work is that we put in training data, and then the model will output a 0 or a 1. 0 meaning, again, that it was not fishing, and 1 meaning that the boat was fishing. Now let's transition into what makes this project special. So the current status quo for this problem, which is time series classification, are CNNs and LSTMs. The problem with CNNs is that they're too dependent on the size and quality of the training data. The data set is too large, it takes too much time to train, and really isn't that accurate. This is because of its inability to have a quote unquote large viewing window, and is more susceptible to variance within the data set. And the more technical reason why this happens is because of the vanishing gradient problem. Without getting too much into the math of a neural network, what it basically means is that it reduces the difference between right and wrong. Going back to the original example, it's like the child's not being rewarded or punished for its mistakes. And LSTMs have a very similar problem, but they're able to process much more information than CNNs. However, much faster, but this comes at the price of lower accuracy. And then I decided to use something called the InceptionTime model. And this is a relatively new model, and this is a lot better since it solves all of our problems with being faster to train, more accurate, and able to process way more larger pieces of data. We'll get onto more detail on the technical overview of the InceptionTime model, but first let's go over the pre-processing that happened. So when we got the data, we needed to do a couple things. First was interpolation. As you can see here, the time gaps between each interval is not equal. Sometimes it's 3 hours, sometimes it's 2 hours. But in order for us to pass it into the model, we all need to make it the same. So we do interpolation, which basically fills in those gaps within the data set. And then we have sequencing. Basically, the real problem is that whenever we put in data into the model, if we just put in one piece of data, the thing with that is that it only has that one piece of data and does not understand how that piece of data relates to the previous one. Because if you have to think about it from a logical perspective, when you have a boat that's moving around from place to place to place, and it has all this, and if you envision this on like a map, it has the pattern going up and down, up and down. But if it only has one data point, the model isn't able to recall the previous points. So what we do is that we kind of squish all these points together and make this all one data point. As you can see here, it goes across in like a sliding motion, and it creates pieces of data where it shows not only where the boat was currently or in that hour, but 24 hours before. So the model can get the whole history of the boat, and then it can be able to predict much better since it has way more data. Now let's move on to the Inception module, which is the main part of the InceptionTime model. The big advantage of this is that since it allows the internal layers to pick and choose which filter size is relevant to learn the required information, it just works way better. Additionally, it uses residual connections to allow the data to move way faster, thus reducing the problem of the exploding gradients. And it can also tune this filter side inside using the parameter of receptive field. This is the receptive field equation, and the impact that it has is that it allows it to make the model contextualize the data set better. Think of it reading like a book. You can understand the book better the more pages you read at a time. So for someone who reads 30 pages at a time and then takes a break for 10 minutes, compared to someone who is able to process content much better, compared to a person who only reads 10 pages at a time. So, but how would this model really help authorities? Basically, if it was deployed, we could hand over this model to the authorities, and they will be able to see, they will be able to process all the data that's coming in. And then from there, they'll be able to see whether certain boats are fishing or not. And if these boats are registered to be fishing, or they will leave them alone. And if they're not, then they'll go out and handle it themselves. Thanks for listening to my presentation. If you have any questions, you can email me with I'll include my email in the description. But thank you for listening and have a nice day. Bye.